District Attorney Rebecca Walsh was counting on Sarah Mitchell's testimony to win the biggest medical malpractice case of her career. Sarah, a diabetic, had brought her alert dog Rocky to court as required by law. Everything seemed normal until Sarah began describing the night her husband died. That's when Rocky detected something that would turn a routine testimony into a life-or-death emergency. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Monroe County Courthouse as Sarah Mitchell sat nervously in the witness waiting room. At 34, Sarah had endured more tragedy than most people face in a lifetime. 3 years earlier, her husband David had died due to what she believed was preventable medical negligence at Riverside General Hospital. Now, after years of legal battles, she was finally getting her day in court. Beside her sat Rocky, a 4-year-old golden retriever who had been specially trained as a diabetic alert dog. Since being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 16, Sarah had learned to manage her condition carefully, but the stress of major life events could cause dangerous fluctuations in her blood sugar levels that were difficult to predict or control. Rocky wore his official service dog vest, clearly identifying him as a working animal providing essential medical services. His training had been extensive and rigorous, teaching him to detect the subtle chemical changes that occurred when Sarah's blood glucose levels dropped dangerously low or spiked too high. The dog could sense these changes often 15 to 20 minutes before Sarah would experience symptoms, giving her crucial time to take corrective action. District Attorney Rebecca Walsh had been preparing for this case for 18 months. At 45, she was known throughout the legal community for her meticulous preparation and passionate advocacy for victims of institutional negligence. The medical malpractice lawsuit against Riverside General Hospital represented one of the most significant cases of her career, with potential damages exceeding $2 million. The case centered around the death of David Mitchell, a 36-year-old construction worker who had been admitted to Riverside General with chest pain and shortness of breath. Despite clear symptoms suggesting a heart attack, the emergency room staff had misdiagnosed his condition as anxiety and discharged him with instructions to follow up with his primary care physician. David had collapsed in the hospital parking lot and died before paramedics could revive him. Sarah's testimony was crucial because she had been present during David's entire hospital visit and had repeatedly asked the medical staff to run cardiac tests. Her detailed account of the medical team's dismissive attitude and failure to follow proper protocols would be essential for proving the hospital's negligence. The defense team, led by renowned medical malpractice attorney Jonathan Pierce, had spent months trying to discredit Sarah's potential testimony. They argued that her grief had clouded her memory of events and that her version of what happened was unreliable due to emotional trauma. Pierce was known for his aggressive tactics and his ability to rattle witnesses during cross-examination. As Sarah sat in the waiting room with Rocky resting calmly at her feet, she reviewed her notes one final time. She had practiced her testimony countless times with Rebecca Walsh, going over every detail of that tragic night. The emotional weight of reliving David's death was enormous, but Sarah was determined to seek justice for her husband and prevent other families from experiencing similar losses. When the bailiff called Sarah's name, she stood on slightly trembling legs and walked toward the imposing courtroom doors. Rocky immediately sensed her elevated stress levels and moved closer to her side, providing the steady, calming presence he had been trained to offer. His warm brown eyes held the kind of intelligence and compassion that made him exceptionally good at his job. The courtroom was packed with spectators, including several members of David's family, medical professionals, and journalists covering the high-profile case. The gallery buzzed with quiet conversation until Judge Patricia Morrison called for order. Judge Morrison, with 25 years of experience on the bench, was known for running an efficient courtroom while showing appropriate sensitivity to emotional testimony. As Sarah approached the witness stand, she could feel hundreds of eyes watching her every move. The weight of responsibility was enormous, not just to David's memory, but to other patients who might suffer similar fates if the hospital's negligent practices weren't addressed. Rocky walked calmly beside her, his presence providing the confidence she needed to face this crucial moment. "Please state your name for the record," Rebecca Walsh said gently after Sarah had been sworn in. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell," she replied, her voice clear but tight with emotion. "Mrs. Mitchell, can you tell the court about your relationship to the deceased, David Mitchell? David was my husband. We were married for 8 years before he died. Sarah's voice cracked slightly on the last words, and she paused to compose herself. Rebecca Walsh continued with preliminary questions, establishing Sarah's credibility as a witness and her presence during the events in question. Throughout this initial questioning, Rocky remained calm and alert beside Sarah's chair, occasionally glancing around the courtroom but showing no signs of distress or unusual behavior. The defense attorney, Jonathan Pierce, watched Sarah carefully from his table, making notes and preparing for what he anticipated would be an aggressive cross-examination. Pierce had built his reputation on his ability to find weaknesses in emotional testimony and expose inconsistencies that could cast doubt on witnesses' reliability. Judge Morrison observed the proceedings with the careful attention of someone who had seen countless emotional testimonies over her career. She was particularly aware of Rocky's presence, as service animals in courtrooms required special accommodation and consideration to ensure both the animal's working ability and the court's dignity were maintained. Mrs. Mitchell, I'd like you to tell the court about the events of March 15, 3 years ago, Rebecca Walsh said, her voice gentle but professionally focused. Sarah took a deep breath, unconsciously reaching down to touch Rocky's head for comfort. The familiar softness of his fur helped center her as she began to recount the most traumatic night of her life. David came home from work that evening complaining of chest pain, Sarah began. He said it felt like pressure, and he was having trouble catching his breath. I wanted to call an ambulance, but he insisted we drive to the emergency room ourselves. As Sarah continued her testimony, describing their arrival at Riverside General Hospital around 8:30 p.m., Rocky remained calm and attentive. His training had included exposure to various stressful environments, and courtrooms were among the settings where he had learned to maintain his composure while staying alert to Sarah's medical needs. When we got to the emergency room, David was sweating and looked pale, Sarah continued. I told the triage nurse that I thought he might be having a heart attack, but she seemed dismissive. She said chest pain was common and that anxiety often caused similar symptoms. Rebecca Walsh guided Sarah through a detailed chronology of events, establishing the timeline of David's treatment and the various medical professionals who had interacted with him. Sarah's account painted a picture of a medical team that had made assumptions about David's condition without conducting proper diagnostic tests. Did you express your concerns about David's condition to the medical staff? Rebecca asked. Multiple times, Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger with conviction. I asked Dr. Peterson if they were going to do an EKG or blood work to check for heart problems. He told me that David was young and healthy, and that his symptoms were probably just stress-related. Throughout this portion of her testimony, Sarah's blood sugar levels remained stable, and Rocky showed no signs of alert behavior. The dog lay quietly beside her chair, occasionally shifting position but maintaining the calm, professional demeanor expected of a working service animal. As Sarah described the hospital staff's repeated dismissal of her concerns and their failure to conduct basic cardiac tests, her emotional investment in the testimony was clearly evident. Her voice carried the weight of 3 years of grief and frustration, but she maintained her composure and provided clear, detailed answers to Rebecca's questions. Mrs. Mitchell, can you describe David's condition when the doctor decided to discharge him? Rebecca Walsh asked, preparing to address the most critical part of Sarah's testimony. Sarah's composure began to waver as she approached the most difficult part of her account. David was still complaining of chest pain, but Dr. Peterson said it was muscular and gave him some ibuprofen. He said David should follow up with his primary care doctor if the pain continued. As Sarah delved deeper into the emotional core of her testimony, describing her husband's final moments and her desperate attempts to convince the medical staff to take his symptoms seriously, the stress began to affect her body's biochemistry. The combination of traumatic memories and courtroom pressure was beginning to trigger the kind of physiological response that could affect her blood glucose levels. Rocky, trained to detect subtle changes in Sarah's scent and behavior that preceded diabetic episodes, began to show the first signs of alertness. His ears perked up slightly, and he shifted his position to face Sarah more directly, though his movements remained calm and professional. I begged Dr. Peterson to keep David for observation, Sarah continued, her voice beginning to shake with emotion. I told him that something was seriously wrong, but he said I was overreacting and that anxiety was contagious between spouses. Rebecca Walsh noticed the increased emotion in Sarah's voice and slowed her questioning slightly, giving her witness time to maintain composure. She was aware that emotional testimony could be powerful for the jury, but she also needed Sarah to remain coherent and credible throughout her account. The courtroom atmosphere grew more tense as Sarah described the hospital staff's dismissive attitude toward her concerns. Several jurors were visibly affected by her account, and even Judge Morrison seemed moved by the testimony. The gallery remained silent, hanging on every word of Sarah's heartbreaking story. As Sarah's emotional state intensified, Rocky's alertness increased correspondingly. The dog's extensive training had taught him to recognize the early warning signs that preceded dangerous drops in Sarah's blood sugar, which often occurred during periods of extreme stress or emotional trauma. We were walking to the car when David collapsed, Sarah said, her voice now trembling with barely controlled emotion. He grabbed his chest and fell to the ground in the parking lot. I screamed for help and started CPR, but I could see that he was already. As Sarah relived the moment of losing her husband, the traumatic memory triggered a significant stress response in her body. The flood of adrenaline and cortisol associated with intense emotional recollection began to affect her blood glucose regulation, causing her levels to drop more rapidly than her conscious mind could recognize. Rocky detected the chemical changes immediately. His training had taught him to identify the specific scent signatures that preceded hypoglycemic episodes, and he could sense that Sarah was entering a potentially dangerous state. The dog stood up and moved closer to Sarah's chair, gently pressing his nose against her leg in the first stage of his alerting sequence. Sarah, absorbed in her testimony, initially didn't notice Rocky's subtle alert behavior. She continued speaking, describing the paramedics' arrival and their unsuccessful attempts to revive David. Her voice was becoming slightly less steady, and her complexion was growing paler, though these changes were barely perceptible to the observers in the courtroom. The paramedics worked on David for almost 30 minutes, Sarah continued, unaware that her blood sugar was continuing to drop. But it was too late. If the hospital had just done a simple EKG or blood test, they would have seen that he was having a heart attack. Rocky intensified his alerting behavior, pressing more firmly against Sarah's leg and beginning to paw gently at her hand. His movements remained professional and non-disruptive, but anyone familiar with diabetic alert dogs would recognize that he was trying to communicate something urgent to his handler. Rebecca Walsh, focused on guiding Sarah through her testimony, noticed Rocky's increased activity but initially interpreted it as the dog responding to Sarah's emotional distress. Service animals were trained to provide comfort during stressful situations, so the increased attention seemed appropriate for the circumstances. However, Rocky's behavior was becoming more insistent. He moved to position himself directly in front of Sarah, making it impossible for her to ignore his presence. His training dictated a specific escalation pattern for alerts, and he was progressing through the sequence exactly as he had been taught. As Sarah continued her testimony, describing the devastating impact of David's death on her life and her belief that it could have been prevented, her blood glucose levels continued dropping toward dangerous territory. The combination of emotional trauma, courtroom stress, and the physical demands of sustained speaking were creating a perfect storm for a severe hypoglycemic episode. Rocky's alerts became increasingly urgent. He began nudging Sarah's hand more insistently and making soft vocalizations designed to get her attention without disrupting the courtroom proceedings. His training emphasized the importance of alerting effectively while maintaining appropriate behavior in public settings. Mrs. Mitchell, Rebecca Walsh said, noticing that Sarah's responses were becoming slightly less focused, "Would you like to take a short break?" "No, I'm fine," Sarah replied, though her voice lacked its earlier strength. "I want to finish this." But Sarah was not fine. Her blood sugar had dropped to approximately 60 mg per deciliter, well below the normal range of 80 to 120 mg/dl. At this level, cognitive function begins to be impaired, and the risk of losing consciousness increases significantly. Rocky could detect these changes long before human observers would notice obvious symptoms. The dog's behavior became more dramatic. He stood on his hind legs, placing his front paws on Sarah's lap, a behavior specifically trained for severe alert situations that required immediate attention. This action was unmistakable to anyone familiar with diabetic alert dogs, indicating a medical emergency in progress. Judge Morrison noticed Rocky's unusual behavior and frowned with concern. "Mrs. Mitchell, is your service dog trying to alert you to something?" Sarah looked down at Rocky as if seeing him for the first time in several minutes. Her cognitive function was becoming impaired, and she was having difficulty processing what the dog's behavior meant. I'm not sure," she said, her words slightly slurred. Rebecca Walsh immediately recognized the signs of a potential medical emergency. She had worked with diabetic witnesses before and understood that Rocky's behavior indicated Sarah was experiencing a dangerous drop in blood sugar levels. "Your Honor," Rebecca said urgently, "I believe Mrs. Mitchell is having a diabetic episode. We need to address this immediately." The realization that Sarah was experiencing a medical emergency galvanized everyone in the courtroom. Judge Morrison immediately called for a recess and instructed the bailiff to contact emergency medical services. The courtroom, which had been silent with attention to Sarah's testimony, suddenly buzzed with concerned voices and movement. Rocky continued his alerting behavior, becoming more insistent as Sarah's condition worsened. Her blood sugar had dropped to approximately 50 milligrams per deciliter, a level at which seizures and loss of consciousness become serious risks. The dog's training kicked into highest gear as he recognized the severity of the situation. "Sarah, can you hear me?" Rebecca Walsh asked, kneeling beside the witness chair. "Do you have your glucose tablets with you?" Sarah nodded slowly, her movements becoming sluggish as the hypoglycemia affected her motor functions. With trembling hands, she reached into her purse and retrieved a small container of glucose tablets, the fast-acting sugar supplements that diabetics carry for exactly these situations. Rocky remained pressed against Sarah's side, providing both physical support and continued alerting until she could take corrective action. His training had taught him to maintain his alert behavior until his handler's blood sugar returned to safe levels, which could take 15 to 20 minutes after treatment began. "Take 3 tablets," Rebecca instructed, helping Sarah open the container. "Chew them completely." Sarah's hands were shaking so badly that she had difficulty getting the tablets to her mouth. The defense attorney, Jonathan Pierce, watched the scene with obvious concern, recognizing that his planned aggressive cross-examination would have to be postponed, possibly indefinitely. Judge Morrison approached the witness stand, her judicial composure replaced by genuine human concern. "Mrs. Mitchell, we're going to get you the medical attention you need. The testimony can wait." As Sarah struggled to consume the glucose tablets, Rocky's behavior provided a real-time indication of her condition's severity. The dog remained in full alert mode, pressing against her, making soft whining sounds, and maintaining constant physical contact. His behavior left no doubt that Sarah was experiencing a serious medical emergency. The courthouse medical team arrived within minutes, bringing professional-grade glucose monitoring equipment and additional treatment options. The paramedic quickly tested Sarah's blood sugar, confirming what Rocky had detected. Her glucose level had dropped to 48 milligrams per deciliter, dangerously close to the threshold where hospitalization might be necessary. As the glucose tablets began to take effect, Sarah's condition gradually stabilized. The paramedics monitored her blood sugar levels every few minutes, watching for the steady increase that would indicate successful treatment of the hypoglycemic episode. Rocky remained attentive and protective, his alert behavior gradually diminishing as Sarah's biochemistry returned to safer levels. "Your blood sugar is coming back up," the lead paramedic reported after 15 minutes of monitoring. "You're at 72 now, which is much better, but we'd like to observe you for another 20 minutes to make sure you're stable." Rocky's behavior provided additional confirmation of Sarah's improving condition. As her blood glucose levels rose back into the normal range, the dog's urgent alerting gradually transitioned into supportive companionship. He remained close to Sarah but no longer displayed the intense, focused behavior that indicated medical emergency. Rebecca Walsh sat beside Sarah during the recovery period, reassessing how to proceed with the testimony. The medical emergency had clearly demonstrated the ongoing impact of trauma on Sarah's health and well-being, potentially strengthening the case for damages related to her husband's death. "How are you feeling?" Rebecca asked softly. "Better," Sarah replied, though she still appeared pale and shaken. "I'm sorry about disrupting everything. I thought I had my blood sugar under better control." "You have nothing to apologize for," Rebecca assured her. "Rocky did exactly what he was trained to do. He may have saved your life." Judge Morrison returned to check on Sarah's condition, bringing with her a deeper appreciation for the role that service animals played in their handlers' daily survival. "Mrs. Mitchell, that dog of yours is remarkable. I've never seen such precise medical alerting." The courtroom had remained in recess during Sarah's recovery, with spectators and jury members discussing what they had witnessed. Many had never seen a diabetic alert dog in action, and Rocky's performance had been both educational and impressive. The dramatic nature of the medical emergency had also heightened everyone's awareness of the ongoing challenges Sarah faced as a result of losing her husband. Defense attorney Jonathan Pierce approached Rebecca Walsh during the recess, his usual aggressive demeanor replaced by professional concern. "Is Mrs. Mitchell going to be able to continue her testimony today?" "That depends on her condition and what her doctor recommends," Rebecca replied. "We may need to postpone until she's fully recovered." After 30 minutes of monitoring and recovery, Sarah's blood glucose levels had stabilized in the normal range, and she felt well enough to continue her testimony. The paramedics cleared her to proceed, though they remained in the courthouse as a precautionary measure. "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Morrison said as court reconvened, "are you certain you're feeling well enough to continue? We can postpone this until another day if needed." "I'd like to finish," Sarah said, her voice stronger now that her blood sugar had stabilized. "David deserves to have his story told completely." Rocky had returned to his calm, professional demeanor, lying quietly beside Sarah's chair but remaining alert for any signs that her condition might change again. The dramatic medical emergency had demonstrated to everyone present just how precisely trained diabetic alert dogs could be and how essential their services were for their handler's survival. Rebecca Walsh resumed her questioning, now with an even deeper appreciation for the courage it took for Sarah to provide this testimony. "Mrs. Mitchell, before your medical episode, you were describing the impact of David's death on your life. Can you tell the court about the ongoing challenges you faced?" Sarah's testimony now carried additional weight, as the jury and spectators had just witnessed firsthand the kind of stress-induced medical emergencies that had become part of her daily reality since losing her husband. Her account of grief, financial hardship, and health challenges was no longer abstract but had been dramatically illustrated by Rocky's life-saving intervention. "The stress of losing David has made managing my diabetes much more difficult," Sarah explained. "I never know when emotional triggers might cause dangerous blood sugar fluctuations. Without Rocky, I might not have survived some of the episodes I've experienced." As Sarah continued her testimony, Rocky remained vigilant, monitoring her condition continuously. His earlier alerting behavior had likely prevented a medical emergency that could have resulted in seizures, unconsciousness, or even death. The dog's intervention had quite literally saved Sarah's life in front of hundreds of witnesses. The impact on the jury was unmistakable. They had seen not just Sarah's emotional account of medical negligence, but also the ongoing, life-threatening consequences that continued to affect her years after her husband's death. Rocky's alerting had transformed the testimony from a legal proceeding into a powerful demonstration of the lasting damage caused by medical malpractice. When Rebecca Walsh finished her direct examination, defense attorney Jonathan Pierce faced the challenging task of cross-examining a witness who had just experienced a life-threatening medical emergency while testifying about her husband's death. His usual aggressive tactics seemed inappropriate given the circumstances, and the jury's sympathy for Sarah had clearly increased after witnessing Rocky's dramatic intervention. "Mrs. Mitchell," Pierce began, his tone notably gentler than his typical cross-examination style, "I hope you're feeling better now." "Thank you, I am," Sarah replied, with Rocky maintaining his protective position beside her chair. Pierce attempted to question the reliability of Sarah's memory about events that had occurred 3 years earlier, but his approach was hampered by the obvious authenticity of her emotional responses and the dramatic evidence of her ongoing trauma-related health problems. Rocky's alerting had essentially provided real-time proof of the continuing impact David's death had on Sarah's well-being. "Isn't it possible that your grief has affected your recollection of the conversations with medical staff?" Pierce asked. "My grief hasn't affected my memory of watching my husband die because doctors wouldn't listen to my concerns," Sarah replied with quiet strength. "And my grief hasn't affected Rocky's ability to keep me alive when stress threatens my health." Pierce's cross-examination became increasingly ineffective as he struggled to challenge a witness whose credibility had been enhanced rather than damaged by the medical emergency. The jury could see that Sarah's trauma was real and ongoing, making her account of medical negligence more compelling rather than less reliable. Throughout the cross-examination, Rocky continued monitoring Sarah's condition, ready to alert again if her blood sugar levels became unstable. His presence served as a constant reminder of the life-threatening consequences of the stress and trauma Sarah continued to experience as a result of her husband's death. The defense attorney's attempts to portray Sarah as an unreliable witness backfired in the face of Rocky's demonstration of her genuine medical vulnerability. The dog's precise alerting had provided unmistakable evidence that Sarah's health problems were real and serious, supporting her claims about the ongoing impact of losing her husband. Sarah's testimony, dramatically punctuated by Rocky's life-saving medical alert, proved to be the turning point in the medical malpractice case. The jury's deliberation took only 4 hours, resulting in a unanimous verdict in favor of the plaintiff and damages totaling $2.3 million, one of the largest medical malpractice awards in the county's history. The jury foreman later told reporters that Rocky's alerting behavior had been crucial in their decision-making process. "We could see that Mrs. Mitchell's trauma was real and ongoing," he explained. "That dog's intervention showed us the continuing consequences of the hospital's negligence in ways that no amount of expert testimony could have demonstrated." Judge Morrison commended both Sarah's courage in testifying and Rocky's exceptional performance as a service animal. "In 30 years on the bench, I've never seen such a clear demonstration of the vital role that service animals play in their handlers' daily survival," she said. The case received significant media attention, not just for the size of the monetary award but for the dramatic role that Rocky had played in the proceedings. Video footage of the Diabetic alert dog's intervention went viral on social media, educating millions of people about the life-saving capabilities of properly trained medical alert animals. Riverside General Hospital issued a public statement acknowledging the verdict and announcing comprehensive changes to their emergency department protocols, including mandatory cardiac screening for patients presenting with chest pain and enhanced training for staff on recognizing heart attack symptoms in younger patients. Sarah used a portion of her settlement to establish the David Mitchell Foundation, which provides funding for diabetic alert dog training and placement programs for individuals who cannot afford these life-saving animals. "David's death was preventable, but at least now we can help other people survive medical emergencies through Rocky's example," she said. The medical community also took notice of Rocky's performance, with several medical schools incorporating the case into their curriculum as an example of how service animals can provide critical health monitoring and intervention capabilities that complement traditional medical care. 2 years after the trial, Sarah Mitchell's life had stabilized significantly, though she continued to rely on Rocky's vigilant health monitoring and life-saving alerting abilities. The trauma of losing David would always be part of her life, but the successful lawsuit had provided both financial security and a sense of justice that helped her begin to heal. Rocky continued his work as Sarah's diabetic alert dog, maintaining the same level of precision and dedication that had saved her life in the courtroom. His story had inspired expanded funding for service dog training programs and increased awareness about the medical capabilities of properly trained animals. The case had also influenced legal procedures regarding service animals in courtrooms. Many jurisdictions updated their guidelines to better accommodate the medical needs of witnesses and participants who relied on service animals, recognizing that these animals could provide essential life-saving services even during legal proceedings. Sarah became a spokesperson for diabetic alert dog programs, speaking at medical conferences and training seminars about the importance of these animals in managing life-threatening medical conditions. Rocky doesn't just help me manage my diabetes, she would tell audiences. He gives me the confidence to live my life fully, knowing that he's constantly watching over my health. The David Mitchell Foundation had grown into a significant organization, providing diabetic alert dogs to over 50 individuals who might not otherwise have been able to afford these specialized animals. Each placement was a tribute to David's memory and a testament to Rocky's remarkable demonstration of how service animals could save lives. Medical schools and nursing programs began including education about service animals and their capabilities in their standard curricula, ensuring that future healthcare providers would better understand and respect the vital role these animals played in their handlers' medical care. Judge Morrison often reflected on the case as one of the most memorable of her career, not just for the legal precedent it set but for the powerful demonstration of the human-animal bond and the extraordinary capabilities of properly trained service dogs. Rocky reminded all of us that healing and protection come in many forms, she would say. The courtroom where Sarah had testified became something of a landmark for service animal advocates, representing a place where the life-saving capabilities of medical alert dogs had been dramatically demonstrated before hundreds of witnesses. The case continued to be cited in legal and medical literature as an example of how service animals could provide essential medical interventions that complemented and enhanced traditional healthcare. Most importantly, Sarah's story and Rocky's heroic alerting had educated countless people about the realities of living with diabetes and the incredible capabilities of diabetic alert dogs. Their partnership demonstrated that with proper training and unwavering dedication, the bond between humans and animals could literally mean the difference between life and death. Rocky's legacy extended far beyond that dramatic day in court, inspiring improved medical alert dog training programs, better legal accommodations for service animals, and increased funding for placement programs that put these life-saving animals with people who needed them most. The golden retriever who had refused to let his handler face a medical emergency alone had become a symbol of the extraordinary potential for healing and protection that existed in the partnership between humans and their animal companions. If this incredible story of Rocky and Sarah's courtroom emergency touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing true stories about service animals whose training and dedication save lives every day. These remarkable animals remind us that heroism comes in many forms, and sometimes the most important medical interventions come from four-legged heroes who never stop watching over those they're sworn to protect.